If you prefer being alone, struggle to connect with others, or feel fundamentally different from everyone around you, this isn't just your personality. Jung discovered this is a biological and psychological adaptation to specific childhood events that literally rewired your brain for isolation. What happened to you wasn't random. It was systematic. And it's still running your life today. Jung spent decades documenting what he called the constructed defense mechanism of solitude. The loner isn't born, the loner is made. And the patterns that made you are hidden in plain sight, operating in your nervous system right now, controlling how you relate to every person in your life. These patterns are so deeply embedded that you probably think they're just who you are. But Jung discovered they're actually who you had to become to survive. Today, I'll show you exactly what your childhood did to create the loner you've become, and why understanding these patterns transforms you from broken to powerful. Here's what most people don't understand about being a loner. Your brain didn't just decide people are exhausting. Your nervous system learned through repeated childhood experiences that isolation equals safety, that solitude equals survival. When early environments are unsafe, invasive, or emotionally chaotic, the developing brain makes a calculation. It rewrites its own circuitry to prefer aloneness, because aloneness meant protection. Jung documented this across hundreds of patients. He saw children who learned showing up authentically in their families led to punishment, rejection, or emotional abandonment. So their brains adapted. They built what Jung called psychological fortresses, walls so high that connection became impossible. But here's the twist Jung discovered. These walls weren't built to keep you in. They were built to keep everyone else out. The brain of a child in an unsafe environment develops differently than a child in secure attachment. Neuroscience confirms what Jung observed. When children experience emotional neglect, enmeshment, or parentification, their brains rewire neural pathways. The default mode network, which handles social cognition, gets suppressed. The salience network, which detects threats, becomes hyperactive. Your brain has been trained to perceive social interaction as dangerous. The amygdala becomes oversensitive. Your body produces stress hormones in social situations that other people's bodies don't. Socializing feels harder because your nervous system is wired differently. And this is where it gets disturbing, because you've probably spent your entire adult life believing something is wrong with you, that you're broken, that you're too sensitive, too different, too weird. But Jung discovered the opposite. Loners aren't defective, they're adapted. They survive childhood environments that would have destroyed someone with less psychological resilience. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to walk you through the 5 hidden childhood patterns Jung identified across decades of clinical work. These aren't theoretical concepts. These are specific scenarios that created specific adaptations. And when you recognize your pattern, everything about your adult isolation suddenly makes sense. Jung called the first pattern the invisible child. This is the child who learned that being seen meant being criticized, controlled, or corrected. Parents who were emotionally unavailable, distracted, or narcissistic taught this child a devastating lesson. Your existence is an inconvenience. Your needs are too much. Your presence requires them to do emotional labor they're not willing to perform. Maybe you'd come home excited about something you accomplished, and your parent barely looked up from their phone. Maybe you tried sharing a problem, and they told you to figure it out yourself. Maybe you expressed an emotion, and they told you to stop being dramatic. Each interaction taught the same lesson. Your inner world doesn't matter to them, so you learned to stop sharing it. So what did you do? You disappeared, not physically, psychologically. You learned to take up no space, make no noise, need nothing. You became a ghost in your own home. Jung documented how these children would sit in rooms with their families and feel completely alone, because they were. Their parents looked through them, not at them. Their siblings existed in a reality these children couldn't access. You probably remember specific moments when you realized you were invisible. Family dinners, where everyone talked around you. Car rides where your siblings got attention and you got silence. Birthdays where everyone went through motions, but no one really saw you. These weren't isolated incidents. They were your normal, and normal teaches your brain what to expect. The adaptation was brilliant and tragic. Your brain learned that visibility equals pain, so you became invisible. You stopped asking for help, stopped sharing your thoughts, stopped believing anyone cared what you felt. And here's the cruel part. This strategy worked. When you disappeared, the criticism stopped. When you needed nothing, you couldn't be disappointed. When you existed quietly, you were safe. Now you're an adult, and you still disappear. You sit in your car for 20 minutes before going into social gatherings, building energy to be seen. You feel exhausted after 1 hour of small talk because visibility still registers as danger. You prefer text messages to phone calls because written words let you stay invisible. You cancel plans at the last minute. You keep relationships surface level even after years. Empaths aren't broken. They're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. You give generic answers when people ask how you're doing because the truth feels too revealing. Jung understood something profound about the invisible child. You didn't lose the ability to connect. You learned connection required erasing yourself, and no authentic relationship can survive that equation. You can't be loved if you're invisible, but you also can't be hurt. So you chose safety over connection. And now you're a loner who craves intimacy, but can't tolerate the vulnerability required to have it. You've built your entire life around not being noticed, because being noticed meant being hurt. The second pattern Jung documented was the parentified child. This is the child who became the parent to their own parent. The child who learned that their role in the family wasn't to be cared for, but to provide care. Alcoholic parents, mentally ill parents, chronically overwhelmed parents. They didn't mean to destroy you, but they made you responsible for emotional labor no child should carry. You learned to read rooms before entering them. You developed a 6th sense for emotional temperatures. You could tell if it was good or bad within seconds. You learned to manage other people's emotions before your own. You became the emotional regulator for adults who should have been regulating for you. You learned your value came from being useful, from fixing, from serving. Jung saw how these children developed what he called hyper-empathy. They could sense emotional shifts before anyone spoke. They knew who needed what and when. They became little therapists, mediators, saviors. Maybe you were the one who calmed your mother when she was crying. Maybe you hid bottles before your father came home. Maybe you took care of younger siblings because your parents couldn't. Maybe you were the one everyone came to with problems because you were the only stable person in a chaotic system. You were praised for being mature, responsible, wise beyond your years. But that praise was a trap. It taught you your worth came from carrying weight you were never meant to lift. The adaptation was extraordinary. You became more emotionally intelligent than the adults around you. You could predict explosions before they happened. You could soothe chaos. You could hold everyone together. But here's what you lost. You lost childhood. You lost being cared for, protected, held. You lost the developmental stage where you learn your needs matter. Now you're an adult loner who can't ask for help. Because asking for help wasn't your role. Your role was providing help. You're the friend everyone calls in crisis, but you have no one to call when you're drowning. You're exhausted from relationships because relationships still feel like jobs. You give until you have nothing left, then disappear to recover. And when someone offers to help you, you don't know how to receive it. It feels wrong, like weakness. So you decline, and the loneliness deepens. Jung documented how parentified children become loners out of sheer depletion. They're not antisocial, they're exhausted. Every relationship feels like emotional labor because they never learned relationships can be mutual. They never experienced someone meeting their needs with the same intensity they met everyone else's. So solitude becomes the only space where they're not responsible for someone else's emotional state. The third pattern is the enmeshed family. This is the child who grew up in a family with no boundaries, no privacy, no individual identity. Everything was shared. Everyone knew everyone's business. Separation was treated as betrayal. Independence was punished as abandonment. You weren't allowed to have a self separate from the family unit. Jung saw how these children experienced something he called psychological suffocation. Their parents demanded complete transparency. Going to your room meant you were hiding something. Having private thoughts meant you were keeping secrets. Wanting time alone meant you didn't love your family. The message was clear and devastating. You don't get to be an individual. You exist to be part of us. Maybe your parents read your diary and said they had a right to know everything. Maybe they opened your mail, went through your phone, interrogated you about friendships. Maybe family members walked into the bathroom without knocking, came into your room without permission, made decisions about your life without asking. Maybe emotional experiences that should have been yours got shared with everyone, discussed at family dinners, turned into family property. You learned nothing belonged to you, not even your own feelings. The adaptation was pure survival. You learned to create internal boundaries, since external boundaries weren't permitted. You built a rich inner world no one could access or control. You became expert at hiding in plain sight, physically present, but psychologically absent. You learned your real self could only exist in secret. That authenticity was dangerous, that being known meant being controlled. Now you're an adult who experiences intimacy as invasion. When someone wants to know you deeply, your nervous system screams danger. You have friendships, but they're carefully controlled. You share some things, but never everything. People feel like they know you, but you know they don't. You might date someone for years and still keep parts of yourself locked away. When relationships start feeling too close, you create distance automatically through fights, busyness, or needing space. Jung understood that enmeshed family loners aren't afraid of connection. They're afraid of losing themselves in connection. Every relationship feels like a potential hostage situation. Get too close and you'll lose your identity. Let someone in completely and they'll take over. So you stay a loner. Not because you don't want love, because you want yourself more. And preserving yourself has always required distance. The fourth pattern Jung identified was the scapegoat child. This is the child who became the designated problem in a dysfunctional family system. When families can't face their collective dysfunction, they need someone to blame. They need someone to carry the shadow. And if you were sensitive, perceptive, or honest about what you saw, you became that person. You were called too sensitive when you reacted to chaos that shouldn't have existed. You were called dramatic when you named abuse everyone else pretended wasn't happening. You were called the problem child when you were actually the truth teller in a family committed to lies. Jung documented how these children see clearly but get punished for their clarity. Maybe you pointed out dad's drinking was destroying the family and everyone turned on you for being disrespectful. Maybe you said mum's behavior was manipulative and got accused of being cruel. Maybe you refused to pretend everything was fine and suddenly you were the reason everyone was upset. The family needed a villain and you became it, not because of what you did, but because of what you refused to ignore. The adaptation was withdrawal into radical self-trust. You learned your perceptions were accurate, even when everyone told you they weren't. You learned to trust yourself over the group. You learned that speaking truth led to exile, So you stopped speaking. You didn't stop seeing. You just stopped sharing what you saw. And slowly, you separated from the family emotionally. You were there physically, but gone psychologically. Now you're an adult loner who trusts almost no one. Because trusting your family led to betrayal. Trusting the group meant denying reality. So you trust yourself. Only yourself. You don't join groups easily because groups require collective agreements about reality, and you won't sacrifice truth for belonging. You see patterns others miss. You sense dysfunction before it becomes obvious. And you've learned to keep these observations to yourself because sharing them makes you the problem again. Jung saw that scapegoat loners carry specific strength. They learn to stand alone against collective delusion. They learn that integrity matters more than approval, but they also learn something painful, that seeing clearly often means standing alone, that truth-telling costs you belonging, that clarity and connection rarely coexist. You'd rather be alone and sane than connected and gaslighted. The fifth pattern is the overstimulated child. This is the child with a sensitive nervous system born into a loud, chaotic, or emotionally intense environment. Jung identified these children as what he called introverted intuitives with heightened sensory processing. They felt everything more deeply than others. They processed emotional data others missed. They were overwhelmed by stimulation that didn't bother anyone else. Your family didn't understand you. They called you weak when you needed quiet. They called you antisocial when you needed recovery time after stimulation. They told you to toughen up when your nervous system was literally processing more information than theirs. You weren't being difficult. You were drowning in sensory and emotional input that your brain couldn't filter. Maybe loud family gatherings felt physically painful, while everyone else seemed fine. Maybe you could feel tension in the room others claimed wasn't there. Maybe watching people argue made you feel sick, while your siblings barely noticed. Maybe you needed hours of quiet after school while your parents thought you were difficult. Your nervous system was taking in more data, more intensely, than others around you. And no one validated that experience. The adaptation was retreat. You learned your room was the only place where the volume lowered. You learned solitude restored what socializing depleted. You learned to protect your energy because no one else would. You became skilled at managing your nervous system through isolation. You discovered alone wasn't lonely. Alone was peaceful. Now you're an adult loner whose nervous system still registers other people as overstimulating. You need hours alone after social events to feel normal again. You prefer one-on-one conversations to groups because groups create too much data for your brain to process. You have elaborate recovery rituals after being around people. Complete silence, dim lights, no stimulation. You're regulating a nervous system that processed more information in 2 hours than most people process all day. Jung understood that overstimulated loners aren't antisocial. They're protecting a nervous system that experiences the world more intensely than others. They're not weak. They're processing more information than less sensitive people. But that processing requires energy, and socializing depletes it. So they choose solitude to survive. It's not a personality flaw. It's a nervous system reality. Here's the pattern Jung discovered across all 5 types. Every loner learned in childhood that being alone was safer, easier, or more authentic than connection. Your brain made a calculation based on available data, and it made sense. It kept you alive. It protected you from harm. It allowed you to preserve some version of self in an environment that threatened your survival. But Jung discovered something else, something that changes everything about being a loner as an adult. He called it the shift from traumatic isolation to conscious solitude, because there's a difference between being alone because you're afraid and being alone because you choose it. There's a difference between isolation as a wound and solitude as a practice. Traumatic isolation is what your childhood created. It's reflexive, defensive, fear-based. You're alone because connection triggers old nervous system responses, because intimacy feels like danger, because vulnerability means possible destruction. Traumatic isolation is being a loner who wants connection but can't tolerate the risk. Conscious solitude is what Jung believed loners could transform into. It's choosing aloneness from strength rather than fear. It's understanding you need solitude to function well, but you're also capable of connection when you choose it. Conscious solitude means you're alone because it serves you, not because you're hiding. Traumatic isolation contracts your world. Conscious solitude expands it. Jung called this transformation part of the individuation process. Individuation means becoming who you actually are rather than who childhood forced you to be. It means recognizing that adaptations that saved you as a child might limit you as an adult. It means updating the story your nervous system tells about connection. Here's what that looks like practically. It means noticing when you're isolating from fear versus choosing solitude from wisdom. It means recognizing that your childhood patterns still run automatically, but they don't have to run you. It means learning that some people are safe even though your nervous system doesn't believe it. It means slowly expanding your capacity for connection while honoring your need for space. Jung believed loners had a specific gift. They learned to be comfortable with themselves in ways most people never do. They developed rich inner lives that don't require constant external validation. They became self-sufficient, self-aware, psychologically independent. These aren't weaknesses. These are profound strengths. You've spent years building a relationship with yourself that most people never develop. But Jung also knew loners often pay a price. They miss experiences that require vulnerability. They sacrifice intimacy for safety. They choose familiar isolation over risky connection. And sometimes they confuse their childhood adaptation with their adult identity. They think being a loner is who they are rather than what they learned to be. The truth is more complex. You're not broken because you prefer solitude. You're adapted, but you're not stuck with childhood adaptations that no longer serve you. You can keep what works. The comfort with aloneness, the self-sufficiency, the rich inner world, while updating what doesn't work. The reflexive isolation, the fear of intimacy, the belief that connection always costs you your very self. Jung spent his life studying the individuated person, someone who stands apart from the collective unconscious, someone who can be alone without being lonely, someone who connects authentically without losing themselves. And he believed loners were uniquely positioned to achieve this. Because you've done the hard part. You've learned to stand alone. Now you just need to learn that standing alone can be a choice rather than a defense. That you can visit connection and return to solitude. That you can be known without being controlled. That intimacy doesn't have to mean invasion. That your childhood patterns were brilliant adaptations that kept you safe, but safety and thriving aren't the same. Your childhood made you a loner for reasons that made sense. Your brain adapted to protect you, but you're not that child anymore. You're an adult with agency, choice, awareness. You can honor the adaptation while questioning whether it still serves you. The goal isn't to stop being a loner. The goal is to become a loner who chooses solitude rather than defaulting to it. Jung's final insight about loners was this: you're not broken, you're protected. The question isn't whether you should stop being a loner. The question is whether you're being a loner consciously or unconsciously, whether you're alone because you're healing or hiding, whether your solitude is medicine or avoiding the wound. There's a version of you that still loves solitude but isn't imprisoned by it. That's a conscious loner, and that makes all the difference. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, Beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook. In stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.